Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, November 15th, 2021. I'll call this meeting to order. And our first item tonight is a discussion of Main Street reconstruction and right-of-way requirements. This is set for 50 minutes with both Senior Client Manager Aaron Munzinga. To introduce is Director Schrage with Public Works.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So tonight we are going to pick up where we left off at the March meeting of this year on Main Street reconstruction. There are three overall topics for tonight. One is I will provide you some history from where we began in 2017 to where we're at today. The second item is a follow-up from the March 15th meeting on a design alternative at 6th Street. And the third and final item would be going over the overall corridor right-of-way impacts. As most of you are aware, with large-scale construction projects, we have temporary and permanent easements that are needed to complete the construction, so we'll go through those with you. So first off, a little bit of history. 2017, the city contracted with a consultant by the name of Cedar and Associates to perform an overall traffic corridor study, basically from 6th Street south to Searly Boulevard. Part of that traffic study process required individual stakeholder meetings with the businesses, individual residents. We had multiple public informational meetings as part of that process as well. With ultimately, in August of 2017, received some direction from council to move forward with a 3-lane corridor and on-street bike accommodations at that time. Goal setting of last year, this was a topic of discussion with many new council members since the 2017 presentation. Some of the council consensus was to hear the findings of the report and some of that information that was presented at the 2017 meeting. So this last spring, I had Snyder and Associates come back 2 different times. The first time was to provide information to this current council of information from the 2017 study. And out of that presentation, there was a few questions and follow-up things that we needed to do. So the consultant then came back on March 15th and provided that information to you folks. So out of the March 15th meeting, staff was left with the direction of moving forward in design with the 3-lane corridor and on-street bike accommodations and roundabouts at 12th, 18th, and Searly. Part of that, council requested a design alternative for the 6th Street intersection of the potential of a traffic signal versus a roundabout. So with that, Aaron Moniza is here with Fourth Infrastructure to kind of go through those details with you.
Thank you, Mr. Moniza. The floor is yours, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. I know some of you folks I've met in the past, some I haven't. So this is just what I look like. So but appreciate the time here this evening. And as Chase said, there's a couple items here that we would like to go through here. The first item, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersection there at 6th Street. And then the second item, we'll get into some of the right-of-way impacts, potential right-of-way impacts here for the corridor. So as Chase said, I know there's been a lot of work already done here with the Main Street corridor, as recently here as the last meeting that you folks had on this, I think back in March. The next steps was for us to come back and look at the design option for a roundabout at the 6th Street intersection, which is essentially what we're going to tackle here first. Now we looked, of course, one of the options, the first option we looked at would be a signal, and then we did kind of do a couple different iterations here on looking at kind of fitting a roundabout in that intersection and kind of the best way to do that here, kind of balancing some of the feedback that was shared from the previous meeting with, how much of a, how much right-of-way disruption kind of a traditional size roundabout was causing. So the first thing here is, so obviously this is the traffic signal option. Pretty straightforward. Essentially, this is really, in all essence, kind of rebuilding the intersection back to really what we have today. Now, as you folks all know, we've got to get in there regardless with the condition of the pavement and replace all that. But here, this kind of image will give you, at least as you look at, we isolated here the intersection, and this will kind of give you an idea of just kind of what the limits footprint would be, for the new pavement that we would need if we went along with the traffic signal option. So really here to kind of summarize, the biggest pros with this option is there's really no right-of-way, a little bit of a smaller footprint in terms of, kind of the construction limits we need to have. On the flip side here, one of the things that we would need to do with this option is we would need to replace the traffic signal itself in addition to just the intersection work there. And then finally, as you can see here on the slide, so again, trying to compare the two options here, starting with the signal, the construction cost, again, we're just isolating this intersection, but, the estimated construction cost for this is about $362,000. And again, that's for the signal option. So if I could kind of move on here, and now let's kind of take a look at what a roundabout would look like here at 6th Street. And again, what you see here shown on the slide is actually is what we call a little bit of a smaller size roundabout than what you saw here at the previous meeting. Now again, the first iteration that you saw was more of our traditional size roundabout. Of course, that had some significant impacts, particularly there to the gas station, as well as I think almost all 4 quadrants. So we've kind of looking at this particular location with the traffic that's there, with the speeds that we have. So we've kind of shrunk this roundabout down a little bit to more of a compact size. And here's why you can see how that fits in up there. So the biggest benefits that we have are the same benefits that you have really with any roundabout intersection. So we're going to have improved safety. We're going to have improved traffic operations. Now, on the flip side of that, I know it might be a little bit hard to see here up on the slide, but we do have some right-of-way impacts here at 3 of the corners, actually at all 4 corners. It's pretty small overall. We're talking about 230 square feet, but we do have small impacts at all 4 of the corners. And then the other element here with the roundabout also is the impact to the library parking lot and the estimated loss of stalls that the roundabout option would have. Now, we haven't really gotten far enough in our design. There's some things we can probably fine tune with this, but just to be conservative, we're kind of estimating somewhere in that 10 to 13 stall range of potential stalls that would be lost with this option. And then in the number that you see here on the screen, the let's call it 410,000. Now that's the estimated construction cost for this. That does include an estimate on the loss of those parking stalls. So we've kind of looked at what we would normally compensate a private business owner for that, and we've kind of included that cost in here. So you were looking at like 410,000 construction versus 362. If you took out the parking stalls themselves and just looked at it from a construction cost, the roundabout's about $21,000 more just in pavement and grading and underground. So now there's a bunch of numbers and letters here on this slide. But what I wanted to show you here is we're going to talk just a little bit about the level of service. So this is really how the intersection will function, kind of from a traffic perspective. Really, the level of service is kind of a measure of, your delay and kind of the operating condition of the movement, the traffic movements, as well as the intersection itself. So it's kind of like being in school. So A is the best, goes, and F is the worst, kind of goes through A through F. Now, the DOT at a minimum, they like to have their intersections operate no lower than a level of service, a D. In our previous work here at the city, we usually try to keep it at a level of C or higher, for the movements themselves as well as the intersection as a whole. And so I can really, as you look at this, the summary here is, now whether you did a signal or a roundabout, the traffic is actually going to operate just fine with either option. The roundabout would just operate at a little bit higher level. And you can kind of see that here if you look at the slide. If you kind of look on the far left, under the traffic signal, you'll see we do have some movements that are at the level service C and level service B, whereas, from the roundabout option, which is kind of at the far, the one in the middle and the far right, but let's focus on the one on the far right, because that's the kind of the compact design we're looking at. We're going to have really no lower level service than A here, with that option. So the next thing we can look at here is, let's do some, what we call our life cycle cost comparison. To be consistent, this is pretty much the same methodology I believe you folks have all seen in some of the previous work on Main Street. It's also very similar to, what we did on some previous projects, more specifically with University Avenue. But what we can kind of summarize here and kind of the takeaway from this slide is, so basically, the roundabout, there's a number of things that we would consider user costs. Of course, the first cost is the construction cost itself, which really hits just in year one. But besides that, you have things like time and the cost of accidents, the cost of fuel, et cetera. And so if you compare kind of the roundabout to the traffic signal, and this comparison is really on an annual basis, but think of it over kind of the next 20 years, which is the design kind of life that we look at for projects like this. I mean, essentially what you're going to see is, we've got about $146,000 of what we would call user cost savings for the roundabout compared to the signal. And when you look at that over the next 20 years, there's a benefit of about $2.9 million for the roundabout. And again, those costs, just to kind of refresh our memories and kind of go into that, is like that benefits really for the cost of a reduction in crashes. The improved traffic operations, tend to lead to less fuel consumption and less emissions. There's less maintenance with the roundabout. So you can kind of see the list there on the right-hand side, but it's the improvement in safety, the reduction in time, fuel and emissions, and maintenance are really what is kind of captured here in the difference in user costs. So with that being said here, to kind of summarize, so again, looking at the traffic signal option, a little bit smaller footprint, slightly less upfront construction costs, and there's no right-of-way impacts. And we're comparing that here to the roundabout option, which again, we're going to get the safety improvements that you get with the roundabout. We're going to get the better traffic operations. We're going to get the user cost savings here over the next 20 years, which is kind of a little bit better return on the city's investment. And so our position would be to recommend that the city go forward with a roundabout here at this particular location. So with that, I'd actually like to just pause and see if there's any questions that I can address before I tackle the next item on the agenda.
Sure. Mr. Beniza, can you speak at all about the differences between, say, like the larger roundabout that
Sure.
you would see in other areas versus this smaller one? Are there
Certainly.
any additional concerns for like crashes or reaction times or things like that compared with a larger roundabout?
Not in this location, so we feel comfortable. Now, it's just slightly smaller here, so I mean, just to kind of give you a scale, like the roundabout that you see up there has like a 90-foot diameter. The traditional ones are usually around 100 plus feet. And of course, when we're into larger intersections, multi-lanes, you get, significantly larger, 160, et cetera. So in this location, kind of looking at the traffic, we already have low speeds. That it's an ideal location to look at what we would call a compact roundabout or a little bit smaller roundabout.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions from council? Councilor DeVere?
I never did hear what the accident statistics were for that intersection. Can someone tell me what they are?
Yeah, actually, from basically in the last decade here, we've had about one accident per year at this intersection. And it's actually of the corridor, it actually is the one that has the highest percentage of injury accidents. So that, you see that reflected in the user cost summary there that I shared. So, I wouldn't consider the intersection itself to be overly, I have a large level of concern with the intersection and how it's functioning from a safety perspective, but I would certainly say that the roundabout would really address the crashes that have occurred there here in the last decade.
I'm confused. Can you tell me how you get the highest percentage of injuries at that if you only get one accident a year? I'm not quite following how you get that to be the highest
No,
percentage.
what I meant, like, if you look at so for the Main Street corridor, all the different types of crashes that have happened, the crashes that have caused injuries, there's a higher percentage of those at this particular intersection compared to the other intersections at the corridor.
Yeah, I'm still not following how with only one accident, how that can have a higher number than, for instance, 12th Street that might have an average of, say, 4
Yeah.
or 5 accidents a year.
Yeah, it would just be like, they might have higher number, but there's no injuries with those accidents. It just happens to have been more injuries at this particular intersection than the others.
And is that over a span of multiple years then?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, yep. But I will, let me add, because, Councilmember DeVere, you bring up a good point, like, we're talking about a small number of accidents, so, I can go back and double check, but it's like, I can't recall if it's like, if there was, 11 accidents, if 3 of them caused injury here. So, there's,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said there was just one accident a year. Was there 11 or 1?
so there,
What value do you put on a parking spot? You know that number off?
$2,000 is what we used, yep.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Cyrus.
when the parking downtown is at a premium, to just get rid of 11 spots, and if we have to put those into a parking ramp, and a parking ramp, I believe, is between 40 and 50,000 per stall, then we're throwing away the 11 parking spots at 550,000. I'd rather keep those parking spots down there and have the regular intersection.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember DeVere?
Just had one other question. You talked about impact to the gas station. Can you explain exactly how, in the picture, it looked like the impact almost took away their gas pump. Can you explain exactly how much impact there is to the gas station?
Yeah, sure, I can, think I can squeeze back here. So, yeah, it's, so there, this particular option, yeah, there's just a small little impact just right at the corner. It's not even in their parking area, in their paved area or anything like that. I mean, and so like, there's actually like 3 small little impacts at all 4 corners, and that all adds up to 231. But one of course, that 231 is just the 3 private properties. It doesn't include the impact there to the library parcel, since the city already owns that.
So the green lines are not your right-of-way take?
No, and I will get to this, yeah, but just since you brought it up, like, yeah, what the green is actually the temporary construction easements, and I'll touch on that here in just a minute. Those, again, were the areas that we need just temporarily to build the project.
Mayor, just to clarify with Mr. Sires on that, the $50,000 is a parking spot in a new building, is that accurate?
That's for a ramp, between 40 and 50,000 per stall and a parking ramp. We
If
just
you build
paid-
a new building?
I'm talking about, yes, and a new parking ramp to replace those stalls at the library, which we're going to give up. And the other thing, we just paid, I believe we paid Mark Kittrell $7,500 per stall on the first block of Main Street when we bought those stalls back from him and turned those back into city property. Now, that's just what I can recall. That was like one of our very first items that we did. I think we gave him 800,000, something like that, and I can't remember for how many stalls that was.
Are those numbers accurate to staff?
I can tell you on the parking ramp, when our parking consultant, those are the numbers that they have been quoting, is that's how much to put a ramp in would cost around that dollar amount.
Certainly. I was questioning what we paid Mr. Kittrell and River Place for those parking spots.
The amount, I want to say we paid I thought it was 759,000, maybe just a little less than 800,000, but I don't know the number of stalls off the top of my head. Maybe Stephanie knows that.
Thank you.
91 stalls are in that parking lot.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Manisi, if you'd like
Mayor?
to continue. Yes, actually, Councilmember Cruz, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
Yes, thank you. I was curious, looking at the diagram, if those parking spots are in the green area, do we not reclaim those back when the temporary easement is gone? Just by looking at that, it appears that we don't lose parking, but along with that question, if we could convert those to angle parking, which would take up less space depth-wise, or even parallel parking. And then the third part of that, if we shifted everything on this to the south a little bit, would that help in the positioning and not lose the spots at the library? Thank you.
You bet. So I think there was three things I could maybe address them all. The first was, yeah, so the green, kind of our temporary easement, the stalls that I identified, kind of this 10 to 13, are impacted kind of irregardless of the temporary easement. And where a lot of those, or where kind of that impact comes from is, part of it is just obviously we need a little extra width in there with the roundabout option. And then the other part of it came in and just looking at, we might have to do something different with the circulation here within the library and how folks get in and out of there. Could the angle parking be an option? Definitely. And I think, let me be clear too, we haven't really gotten into fine tuning this, and I would say that, at least at this stage, we're taking the approach to probably be as conservative as we can, I think it's similar to how we handled University Avenues, like we're going to try to identify probably the worst case scenario, if you will, and then try to dial that back. But we do also want to make sure folks know, like, yeah, there's certainly going to be an impact to some stalls. And then I think the last part of the question, if I did catch it, was, yeah, we do, in addition to the angle parking, yeah, we could also, if we needed to kind of look at kind of sliding that, I know there's some fine tuning that we can look at here that could maybe help us, save one or two of the stalls. But like I said, we just haven't gotten far enough into design, so I hate to put a number to it until we can kind of move forward with that design, if that's in case the way that the council wants to progress.
Okay, other questions? Thoughts? So if you'd like to continue then?
Certainly. All right. So the second part here of our presentation, I'm going to go through and kind of give the council and mayor an overview just of the potential right-of-way impacts. And again, this is just kind of looking at our concept. And, I just want to also, before I get too far into it, just to make sure everybody's clear. Again, our goal here at this point is to probably we lean towards being a little bit more conservative, knowing that we can always kind of dial things back. So, if there's certain areas that we're a little unsure about this, we've tended to kind of identify that as an impact. And so the first thing is, you'll see a couple different colored areas up there. There's kind of the lighter blue areas that you see in the slide deck, and then in the information that's included with the council packet, that shows the areas that are going to be a permanent acquisition, either from a total parcel take or some of the strip takings we need. The green areas, as I mentioned here a few minutes ago, is like, yes, that's just temporary construction easement. That's something that we'll need kind of on both sides of the corridor, all the way up and down, to kind of be able to build the project. But of course, that's not a permanent acquisition. And then the red areas are the property that's already owned by the city. We've tried to kind of set things up with our conceptual design here to take advantage of that as best that we can. And before I do move on, you can kind of see here from the slides, here's kind of give you some of the kind of the order of magnitude numbers on the number of parcels that we're impacting and what some of that square footage looks like. So I'm going to start here with 6th Street, and again, I'm only, just want to be clear, I know that we've not made any decision on this intersection, whether it's going to be a signal or a roundabout. I'm just showing the roundabout option because that option has right-of-way impact and the signal does not. And so, again, this is a little bit of a repeat, but just to be consistent, when we look at the intersection here itself, you can kind of see that we've got some small right-of-way impacts here at 3 of the corners, like we had talked about here a few moments ago. Now, the next area we want to look at here is at 12th Street, and you folks will probably see a theme here. It's really our right-of-way impacts are, for the most part, concentrated, at the 4 intersections. So at the intersection at 12th Street, this is certainly the intersection where we've got the most impact. You can see that we've got total acquisitions identified for the property in the northwest and the northeast quadrants, as well as some smaller strip takings in 2 other parcels here at this intersection. We've tried to take advantage of the city-owned property the best that we can. We did look at a number of different kind of iterations of where to kind of place this roundabout here. I will tell you, and really what we were finding is, so for example, if we slide this back, we kind of just move the impact from one parcel to another, is probably the simplest way I can say that. And now, we are real close to both those properties that you see shown as total takes. As we get into this, and we can fine tune, we're gonna try to save properties. We know how sensitive that can be, but again, as I mentioned before, we wanna try to be conservative, at least at this stage, and kind of identify kind of the worst case scenario, if you will. Okay, moving on here to the 18th Street intersection. This one is actually pretty minimal impacts, as you can see. Most of the impacts kind of on city-owned property, have a real small impact here to the property kind of in the southeast corner, but really no major right-of-way impacts here at this location. Now, this is the only area really outside of the intersections where we need some right-of-way. Between 20th and 21st, as you can see, we just need a strip in here, and really this is going to kind of help infill with with the sidewalk going in there. Is primarily what this taking would be for. And then finally, here at the Searly Boulevard. Now again, this has some similarities to 12th Street in the sense where we did look at moving this a number of different times. We were trying to kind of balance that impact there to the gas station with some of the properties there to the south. Right now, we've kind of got this as far south as we think we can. Again, if we move it any further to the south, we kind of get into that similar situation where we're kind of saving one impact, but we're kind of moving that somewhere else. And then the further south we get, it also does affect kind of the design of the box culvert, or how we're going to be handling the box culvert here in this location. So to kind of summarize here, and now the only difference between this slide and kind of the first slide that I showed was we did kind of assign just some order of magnitude costs here to the right-of-way impacts. And again, I will say, so for the acquisitions, we've just used kind of the valuation that is currently provided there from the county. So just as a starting point. And then for the strip takings and the temporary easements, we've just used what we would consider kind of the current market rates for those. So for the permanent strip takings, we're using $15 a square foot, and then for the temporary for the temporary easements, we're using $1 a square foot. And then you can kind of see the square footages there for each one of those categories. And of course, have not put a dollar amount there to the city-owned property. So, before I open up for questions, just wanted to give kind of an update here on the schedule. So just a couple things to add, that progress that has been made. So we have submitted the project for a grant from the Traffic Safety Improvement Program there for the DOT. So that's been submitted here back in October. We're supposed to find out sometime here towards the end of the year. We have also walked the corridor, so city staff and I have kind of visited with just about all the business owners along the corridor, just to let folks kind of put some faces to names and provide an update on where things are at and where things are going. So we've kind of made some of that initial contact there as one of the first steps here in the public engagement. And really kind of starting kind of at the end of the slide and working back, we've got, as you folks all know, there's the city's got some federal funds. The first round is in fiscal year 23. So, to really meet that schedule, we want to get the project let here in December of next year. So kind of working backwards from that, we really want to get going on the right-of-way side of things, because as we all know, that process can sometimes take a little bit longer, usually anywhere from 8 to 12 months. So that's kind of the next steps of really accelerating that part of the project. So I think with that, it's your turn, Chase.
So I think now we'll address any questions that anyone has, Aaron or myself. But ultimately, I think staff is looking for some sort of direction tonight to continue with final design. As Aaron alluded to, some of the right-of-way acquisition does take up to 12 plus months, so we need to continue to keep moving on that. So.
Okay, at this point, I'll entertain additional questions. Councilmember DeBoer?
On the Searly Boulevard picture that you showed up, there was a real wide section of bright green, but I didn't quite hear what that was.
Yep. Yeah, so it's temporary, and it's for there's going to be some grading probably that's going to be needed back in that channel for drainage purposes.
So that's because of the box culvert there?
Yep, it's like for the box culvert and then kind of just the drainage channel through there.
Councilor Harding?
On the permanent acquisitions on 12th, do we have, with the property owners there, do we have any idea? Have we talked to them where they're at? I mean.
No, I have not had any contact with either one of those property owners at this point.
Has staff had any contact with them?
No, we haven't at this time, but like Aaron said, until we get into the final design and actually know that we need to acquire the property, we hate to move forward in that direction until we actually know that, no, we only need a 5-foot permanent easement and we don't need the total take.
And so what time frame is that you expect to have that information? Like January?
Yeah,
Sooner?
yeah, I was going to say, Mayor, we coming out of this, we really will ramp up the kind of what we would call like our final design activities, where we really get into the details. And yeah, so you're looking at kind of towards the end of the year, early part of next year, when we would kind of be able to, I think, know exactly kind of where we're looking at for some of these impacts.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Harding?
So I understand that these are worst-case scenarios right now, in which we could try to minimize them. But what happens if we move ahead with the thing and or the roundabout, and then those property owners don't want to sell? What situation do we find ourselves in if we haven't approached them as telling them it's a possibility?
You want me to handle that one?
I'm just curious as to like how the process goes. And
so there's, in that case, there's what's called condemnation. And that's where you can, you try, there's kind of a real rigorous process that's kind of laid out by the federal government that we follow in cases like this. There's like certain steps we take in terms of communication, and there's a period of negotiation. But if something happened and you got to the point where you couldn't come to a negotiated agreement, then you can go into condemnation, which allows the city to acquire the property, and then it just becomes a discussion and negotiation about how much that compensation is. We usually do everything we can to avoid that.
Other questions? Councilor DeBoer?
I know you didn't give it today, but out of curiosity for comparison, how much less is the right-of-way take if you don't have bike lanes or if you didn't have roundabouts? Because I thought I heard you said earlier you were considering 3 lanes, or, excuse me, bike lanes. 3 lanes with bike lanes. Is that what I heard?
Sure, yeah.
So basically, if I'm understanding your question correctly, if it was
If you were doing the 3 lanes with no bike lanes versus 3 lanes with bike lanes, would there be a considerable less right-of-way take?
the intersections would remain the same. If the roundabouts remain, the taking would be the same at the intersections, but the strip takings along the entire corridor as far as temporary easements could be reduced. It would get larger if the corridor was wider. Example, 4-lane would require twice the amount of temporary easement, so it's kind of a trade-off.
And how much less business interruption would there be, for example, at the 2 gas stations involved? The one at 6th and then the one was at Searly.
Like right away in general, or just during construction?
During construction there, because it looks like the one there, I would think they would have a hard time using their pumps, aren't they?
Well, that's something that I guess, to me, we would work to figure that out as part of our staging plan, kind of just like we've done on other projects, university and others, we'll come up with a way to keep businesses open and have access, to and from their pumps in this case. Could there be a small period during the project where, we maybe have to shut down an access to build a driveway? Certainly. But I think for both of those gas stations, we're going to have to work through that as part of our staging plan, like how we keep folks coming in and out of both those businesses, just like we will for all the businesses along the corridor.
Other questions or comments?
Mayor, is there, at 6th Street, have we had any discussions with First National Bank about parking, shared parking, or doing something for overflow at the library there? Have we ever had a conversation with them? And I guess I don't love the idea of losing 10, 13 parking spots down there, but First National Bank, I've rarely seen that parking lot full, so I almost wonder if there's not a more permanent thing that can happen for the library, because the library is consistently, they're full a lot of times, so I wonder if there's not something that can be worked out as part of this.
There's a lot of things to look into yet, and I think Aaron alluded to some of them, but there's things like shrinking the length of the median on Main Street north of this intersection to have additional angled parking on Main Street. Those are all things that we can look into if we can add 2 more angled spots on Main Street itself, and then reduce the ones that are impacted. We may get it down to 5, 6. We don't know until we get into that.
Until you get to final design, sure.
Okay, other
Mayor,
questions?
If there's no more questions, I'd like to make a motion to move forward with the roundabout at 6th. And do we need another motion for the resolution?
The resolution will just happen on its own, correct?
Okay.
So, yeah, just the resolution. So motion's on the floor for moving ahead with the final design for 6th Street as a roundabout. Is that correct? Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and seconded. Open it for additional discussion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we're done.
Okay, so I love a roundabout, but there's just something that doesn't feel right about this 6th Street roundabout, and it is the parking at the library. That is a facility used for our community center and obviously folks who are going to the library. and a lot of times, I speak from my own experience, you're pulling in with a van full of kids, excited to go to the library, and I know that it's up to people to teach their kids how to behave in those situations, but I just think of my own experiences of utilizing that parking lot and being, not having to cross a road, or I just worry about losing parking spots, taking away access. I know folks, if we could somehow encourage folks that might not necessarily need to use the parking lot to park somewhere else, but that's I feel like wishful thinking. I love a roundabout. I love the efficiency of a roundabout. I love the safety of a roundabout, but something doesn't feel right at this location. All the rest of them, I'm totally for, but the one at 6th Street, I'm open for discussion, but right now it just doesn't feel right.
Councilor Harding.
Yeah, second what Kelly's saying. But I have a question. So in the original traffic study and the Main Street study, a roundabout was not suggested at 6th. It was council that really wished to see what was possible, right? So my question would be, originally, why did we not recommend one, but now we feel like we can do one? What's changed? Does that make sense?
So I think more and more communities are moving towards alternatives similar to a compact roundabout. And at the March meeting, if you recall, Snyder and Associates just kind of threw out that idea, and that's kind of what stemmed the discussion of let's look at a design alternative for 6th Street. Traditionally, a larger diameter one would be placed in that location, which would have significant property impacts. So that's kind of how it came.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Councilor Cruz.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Go ahead, Councilor Cruz.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I hear about every third word you're speaking there, but can we take a closer look at the positioning of the 6th Street roundabout and how we could maybe, like I said earlier, slide it to the south, and if we could preserve the parking spots in the library under different scenarios of angle parking or parallel parking, and then maybe the financial center would not be in need of as many spots as they have there, because I recall that being a former grocery store, and I don't know that much parking there is necessarily needed for that banking operation.
Okay, thank you. So the motion that's on the floor is whether or not to continue with a design for a 6th Street roundabout. And what Councilmember Cruz is asking for is to consider changes to that design. So I feel like we'd be putting the cart before the horse if we had that discussion right now. I'd want to get past first whether or not we'd even want to consider moving forward with the roundabout here. So I'd entertain additional discussion on that, or if not, if there's anything else.
If there was a chance that we could not interfere with the parking, and obviously the gas station, I mean, that's hard enough to maneuver around as it is. Those are my two concerns. If there's a chance that something could happen where those things could be less impacted, then I'd love to continue the conversation. But if those things can't change, then I don't know if there's any need to move forward, at least on my end.
Yeah. Mr. Menezes, can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
I was
Like
just
if it's in the realm of possibility to drop that requirement way down for?
The short answer is absolutely. So I mean, how I would respond to that is, is there going to be some impact to the parking stalls with the roundabout? I think the answer to that would be yeah. Could it be much less than 13 or even 10? Yeah, there's a number of things we could do here that would drastically reduce the impact to the stalls. Again, like I said, as I mentioned before, kind of started like the worst case scenario. And so, to me, what I would say, and I completely understand where the council's coming from, if the concern is the overall number of stalls, maybe we could, find out, like, is there kind of a target, right? Like, hey, we could live with, maybe this impact of this amount, to kind of give us something to work with, or is it no impact? If it's no impact, that, would be a little bit different situation. I don't know if I could say that we could do this without having no impact, without probably impacting somebody else. Does that help answer it? Okay.
So with that being the case, if the motion passed here, then we could go forward with additional design work to try to get that change to happen, to see what that impact would be. If it's voted down, then we just won't even know, because it's going to be a signalized intersection. So I feel like that's what's really on the table here, is whether we want FOTH to continue on with trying to get that minimized number of parking impacts. If that makes sense. So anything else before a vote?
I did have.
Councilmember first, and then Councilmember Dara.
So kind of in a nutshell, talking about 6th Street roundabout, it's basically a loss of about 13 stalls, maybe more, maybe less, about $21,000 more in cost, increased right-of-way impact, you said, to the gas station, so which would then be an increased business interruption. But you mentioned that it was called a compact roundabout. So does that mean that there'd be any difficulty for larger vehicles, trucks? I'm not sure when you called it compact, if that meant that it would be restricted on truck traffic.
No, actually, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I probably should have mentioned this too. So when we say compact, it's a little smaller. What's different about that is the center of the roundabout is all traversable. So there won't be any green space in the middle of it. It'll be raised and delineated just like a regular roundabout, but essentially, how on some of the larger roundabouts you have like your truck apron, that's pretty much what the center is.
Okay, so Councilmember Dara.
Now, the only other thing that Kelly mentioned that I hadn't thought about is coming out of Casey's, and going south. Is that impact coming out of a roundabout? Is there any impact on those people exiting there? Or is it just like where the light, similar to the light being there?
Yeah, you're talking about like the driveway access kind of out onto Main.
Right.
To me, that would function for the traffic turning right heading southbound. That would function just like it is today.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Cyrus.
It doesn't seem fair if the city's not willing to give up their parking spots at the library, that we should expect private business to give up theirs. I would rather see the city have the burden. I'm not in favor of this at all, but just to shift it south and put the burden on a private business, I don't think that's right at all.
Any other? Okay, so Councilmember Harding?
I'll be brief. I like roundabouts too. I do get concerned that we're just getting a little trigger happy possibly with it, and I don't know if there's a right answer either way, but it's tough to, we're going to see some parking loss, and that's just something with down there right now that I don't want to see. And it's such a small area. I'm just nervous about trying to force one in there.
Okay, so if no other discussion, then what's on the floor is continuing the design of a roundabout at 6th and Main. If it approves, then they will continue that work to with knowing that they need to try to limit the number of impacts. If it doesn't pass, then it'll be, as I understand it, just designed as a signalized intersection as it is currently, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay. So, motion and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Hey,
Okay, let's see a show of hands for that. So for aye, 1, 2, 3, and for nay, 1, 2, 3, and 4 with Cruz.
Daryl, is he a nay or an aye? I
Daryl,
couldn't
can you
tell.
confirm that you're a nay?
I'm for looking at it further.
Oh, so he's an aye. Okay. So that means that it does pass as an aye. So we will then look to see back from you what that design would look like in an upcoming, I guess, committee of the whole meeting to see if we want to continue on with that approach. So not committed tonight to that, but committed to the design work and the cost it'll be to design. So thank you. So that answers that question. And
we will look forward to seeing those continued plans. Is there anything else that you needed to bring up for us for tonight on this? Okay.
That should be it. So some of the next things you'll see is setting the public hearing for the right-of-way at an upcoming meeting. That's for a corridor as a whole, so we can continue on with the other properties.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Meniza, thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Good seeing everybody. Good evening.
Thank you. And that brings us over to item 2, which is the FY 2021 audit report that's budgeted for 15 minutes, and our city controller, Lisa Roding, is going to speak to us about that. Ms. Roding, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. In your council packet, you received the fiscal year 2021 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Each year, the city's Finance and Business Operations Department issues this annual report. This report represents and reflects the city's financial operations and condition to its city's residents, you as the elected officials, management personnel, financial institutions, city bondholders, and rating agencies, as well as other parties that may be interested in the city's financial affairs. The annual report is prepared in accordance to generally accepted accounting principles, and the financial statements have been audited by an independent public accounting firm. Each year, the Finance and Business Operations Department takes time and energy to prepare this annual financial report. This process is completed by Director Rodenbeck, Paul Kokler, Kathy Niebergall, and myself, as well as others in financial services area. This process takes over 780 staff hours. The annual report is presented in 3 sections: an introductory section, the financial section, and the statistical section. You will find in the introductory section the transmittal letter and the city's organizational chart. In the finance section, you'll find the auditor's opinion letter, the management discussion and analysis, and the financial statements. In the statistical section, you'll find financial and demographic information, and this is usually presented in a multi-year comparison. As required by state law, we are required to have an annual audit by an independent accounting firm. Eide Bailly LLC was engaged to audit the financial statements. They came here in July to do the preliminary field work. They returned in September for the final field work, and as part of that, they reviewed and tested various items, and they gave us an unmodified or clean opinion on our fiscal year 2021 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. The unmodified opinion is the highest level of audit assurance that you can receive on your financial statements. Our auditors have stated that our financial statements have been presented fairly and with all material respects and with respect to the governmental activities. The city is recipients of federal and state funding, and as we have the responsibility to ensure that we do have internal controls in place and that we are following the rules and regulations with regards to these programs. The internal control structure is subject to staff review throughout the year, but it is also part of the city's audit that they do test to determine that we have adequate internal controls and that we have followed the rules and guidelines with regards to our federal programs. Included in the packet is also the schedule of expenditures for federal awards. This lists the programs that we participated in throughout fiscal year 2021. There were 11 programs totaling just about $3 million. We received funding from the U.S. Department of Treasury, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Homeland Security. For fiscal year 2020, the city received a Certificate of Achievement in Excellence for Financial Reporting from the Governmental Finance Officers Association. We plan to submit the application again this year with our fiscal year 2021 report. And as required by state code, we will submit this financial report to the state auditor's office, and it will also be uploaded to the city's website for access to anyone who needs to look at it. There is no council action needed here at the committee meeting. However, later on the council agenda, there is an item to receive and file the fiscal year 2021 comprehensive annual financial report. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Councilor DePerr, go ahead.
Not really a question as much as a comment. You mentioned the award for the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. You left out that that's 31 consecutive years that you guys have done that, and that's outstanding, and we thank you. Lisa, Jen, Paul, Kathy, great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as Ms. Roding mentioned, that report is available online. It's a public document, so if you have an interest in city finances, I strongly encourage taking a look at that document. It's a treasure trove of knowledge about not just how the city expends its money, but how we are inspected and assured that the funds are being spent properly and accounted for properly. So great credit to the city treasurer and to our finance and business operations director and the rest of staff involved in this report.
Thank you.
So any other questions? Okay, then with that, that will conclude our regular city council, or excuse me, our committee of the whole meeting, and we will adjourn until 7 o'clock, and that picks up our regular council meeting. So we are adjourned.